Okay, so we're back, and maybe you noticed from the last video I said I would record the following week, and it's been a month, almost 1 week shy of a month. 1 month, yeah, 5 days. Anyway, okay, you might also notice it's very dark outside today. That's because it is 5:49 a.m. my time, Hawaii. Good morning to you. Cheers. And I gotta tell you, I tried. I tried to record and things kept happening. And let me tell you why. Let me give you a life update before we get into WattPad Analytics and statistics. And not just that, but I'm gonna show you my YouTube dashboard channel, my WattPad insights, my Patreon insights, and my MailerLite insights as a direct result of what I'm doing in order to drum up excitement about my story and tell you a little bit about what I've been doing in order to get that and the time period. And the time period is very important here. So, sorry, I've got an eye itch. Remember, it is still morning for me, like morning. So, life update. When I recorded the first video, I was waiting for some family to move in, and they have now moved in, and I've gone from a family of 3 to a family of 7, and it has been a wonderful chaos around here. Good side of that being, it's been an amazing experience to have our whole family here together finally. And the challenge for that is that I have to now wake up earlier in order to record these videos because my girls wake up super early. My son likes to sleep in, like me, before I was doing all of this. But the girls wake up very early. And so here I am, even earlier than them. Took some rearranging of the schedule, which is great, which is fine. And now we can dive into this video. So, like I said before, what I want to do is walk you through the things I've done, but I'm going to do that by showing you the journey that I've laid out in order to get people first on to WattPad and then move them up a chain so that I can monetize a little bit and then get them on my email. Because if you've been around this side of things for any amount of time, you might have heard that email is very important because you don't own the communication with the people who follow you on pretty much anything else except email, and own, loosely. It's a more stable environment to be able to communicate with the people who are following you, because social media can go down at any point, as we've seen, even though it came right back up. And the other things could shut down at any point, or they could limit your usage and visibility, all these different things. They can affect how your followers actually see you. Email, you have a lot more control over, right? You contact them when you want to contact them, and you aren't limited so much by the service provider. So it's very important. Make sure you have an email list, even if it's a small one, because it will grow, as you'll see. Because again, let me remind you, I started blank slate this time around, and I do have marketing experience, and so I'll be able to walk you through from an experienced eye why these things are important, the journey thus far, and the numbers that are projected out. All right, so this is the first part of the journey, so my YouTube channel, and I'm showing you some of the analytics. Within the last 28 days, I've gained 9 subscribers. I hit my 50 subscriber mark. It's not a lot, but it's a lot more than it was 30 days ago. And that's around the time I started to really push WattPad. And so slow growth is still growth. If I gain 9 subscribers every single month over the last year, you can do the math. But the great thing about this type of platform is that it tends to compound. So the more subscribers you get, the more it's going to compound over time in terms of the view and stuff that you get. Now, I did this a very specific way though. A lot of the published videos you're going to see are actually shorts that I pulled from a longer video. So let's see. This was the last video, and it's actually not going to publish in shorts until this video is done. And this video was one that I recorded reading one of my chapters. And so you can see some of the analytics from the shorts here. And if we go to content, you can see that I actually recorded it like so long ago. It is, oh, it's this one. Okay, so you can see I recorded it in June, and I am still using that content today. So when we go look at the dashboard, I took that video because it was one, the way I choose that is I go to content and I look and I see which videos are getting a lot of interest and engagement. And at that point, that was one that was getting a lot of interest and engagement. So I pulled that and I used another tool that I have that if you're interested in, let me know in the comments and I can show you how I use that. And I split it into automated segments that I could put on social media. And so I don't have my social media up because it's got a lot of data that I would have to blur out, and I don't know how to do that right now. So if you want to see how I move people from social media to these other platforms, just let me know. I can figure out that blurring thing, and then we can look at that. But for now, I'm sharing all of these different shorts on all my social media channels and directing people to come and watch, including YouTube, which is important, and I'll get to in a minute. And I'm directing people to come to the YouTube channel and view the full clip and leave comments and things like that. Now, once they get to the latest video that I published, which was episode 1 of this WattPad journey, which they'll get to, I think, next week. I've also got a call to action in there telling people to come to WattPad. So the next video I record, we'll be able to see what the analytics look like, directing people from a YouTube channel to WattPad, because that is the goal. But in the meantime, I've been drumming up excitement about the story itself using the actual story. And I've gotten some more comments and I've gotten more subscribers. And so you can see engagement has picked up. Okay, let's look at the WattPad analytics here. So this is just the overview. And I want you to note the dates. If you go to my WattPad and you look at the dates where I publish stories, you can see there is a very obvious uptick in views every time I published a chapter of my story. You can also see that's where the votes land, right around there as well. And then that's where the comments are. Now, just looking at the comments, this is really, really great for all of this actually is really great for letting you know how your story is doing from a big picture point of view. And it also gives you some insight a little bit into how WattPad works, right? So the very first day that I published my first chapter was December 26th, which I think was the day I posted the first video too. And so you can see there's an immediate uptick in views. So WattPad does direct people to your story right away whenever you open an account and publish a story for the first time. Now, I don't know if that works if you have an account and you're publishing a new story. That's something that we'll experiment with whenever I publish my next book on here, Persephone Files. So that'll be an interesting experiment too, to see how we can double the experience and how that experience changes over time when you have more than one book. But you can see there's a steady view here, and then it drops, and I publish, and it increases, and it drops, and I publish, and it increases. So what this tells us is that truly, whenever you do publish a story, the algorithm is directing people to it. And also, as people follow you, they're getting those notifications, letting them know that your story has published, a chapter has published, and they can come read it. It's also really good to see over time, because I expect as holidays roll around that view is going to change, but I'm not sure what direction it's going to change, right? Or if which holidays are going to have different changes. For example, are we going to get an uptick over Valentine's Day or downward because people are out on dates? For Christmas, I expected, and we published after Christmas, but for a holiday like Christmas, I would expect that maybe readership would go up because people have more time off. But on other holidays like Valentine's Day, where people are typically out, maybe readership would go down during that time period. I don't know. So we're going to see. Now, the comments one is what really interests me here, because this tells me the kind of engagement that I'm getting. And in each of my chapters, at the bottom, I have a reader question in addition to asking them to move over to my Patreon. And so you can see here that there's a dip and an increase, a dip and an increase in comments over time. And part of this has to do with they may have read it and then they moved on, but you can see that there's a jump in comments on the 18th. So this chapter, when it was posted, its question was more engaging than the questions before it and the questions after it, loosely speaking. There are many variables that would go into why a person would comment or not, but when we look at it like that from a holistic point of view, I need to go back and see the question I posted for the chapter I published on January 18th and figure out why that one was so engaging. Was it because the question was engaging, or was something else going on in the comments section? So that's good for you to know, because it can tell you how you can better engage with your readers. If they prefer a certain type of question, then you can continue to kind of lean into the strength of that. All right, let's look at engagement here. So this is showing you engagement by different parts. So I have 9 parts published right now, and the 9th part is the most engaging one. I got 100% of my readers over to read the latest part, which is really interesting. I didn't get as many for part 8. In fact, part 8 I think was the lowest one. So what does that tell me, right? From an author perspective, it tells me I need to go and look back at part 8 and see what is less appealing about that chapter. Or maybe even look at the date and see, what was going on that day where people weren't interested in coming to Wattpad to read. Now, what I am interested to see in the future is how many people are going to want to read through from beginning to end without missing anything, and how many people are just going to want to jump into the latest thing and not catch up. And that interests me because I want to try to figure out why that is, so I can then, like I said before, try to lean into getting them to read each and every part. So find out what is most engaging about each part and duplicate that with subsequent ones. Okay, and you can see the same thing by votes, right? I really love Wattpad's use of votes so that people can tell you if it was a good chapter or a not so good chapter. So you can see I didn't get any votes for part 6 or part 7. That's super interesting. What about those 2 story segments? Because people read them, right? There's actually an uptick on part 7 of reads, but a lack of votes. So that tells me that people were interested to read. They're interested in following the book and continuing on, but they weren't necessarily engaged in these 2 parts of the story. So I need to go back and see what was less engaging about that. Same with parts 8 and part 9. We got a huge uptick in reads for part 9, but fewer votes. Now, this could also mean that, votes are just dropping off as people go through the story. I'm kind of losing engagement a little bit, which is to be expected because people are always going to be more hot for whatever they're doing in the beginning, and it'll taper off in the end, but it tapered off quite quickly. So we want to go back and look and see from a beta reader perspective, what about these stories is kind of losing them, and where you can go back and fix it before you maybe publish on Kindle, which is my plan eventually. And then comments as well. You can see there's a wave of comments up here and then not so much down here. So be interesting to look at that. Okay, I also want to look at demographics. So on Wattpad, my demographics are split kind of evenly between male and female. And then the age group, which the age group actually interested me a little bit more. My largest segment is 25 to 35. And then 35 to 45 and 18 to 25 are equal. The reason this interested me was because I didn't expect the 18 to 25 demographic. I did expect, 25 or 25 to 45, because that's generally what I assumed my readership would be. But this segment interests me. That surprised me a little bit. So we'll have to go in and see what about maybe the 18 to 25-year-old segment is interested in the book, and do I want to pursue that? So this brings up some more questions as well, is whenever you start to look into all of your analytics, you'll have various directions you can go, various things you might be able to lean into in order to increase certain parts of those analytics. But the problem there is, if you increase some analytics, it may decrease others, right? So if I lean into the 18 to 25-year-old demographic, I'm going to likely lose the 35 to 45-year-old demographic depending on how I do that, right? So you have choices to make as you go through. Do I want to try to increase my readership in this age demographic a little bit more, or do I want to lean more heavily into the 25 to 45-year-old age range, which is typically where my type of sci-fi would hit hardest if we look at books as a whole. Gender, I'm not as concerned about. There's no real data out there to support that, guys or girls read, or non-binary read in any certain genre more than the other for the most part. Those statistics do come from traditional publishing, and it's kind of like a self-licking ice cream cone. So yet to be seen. We'll keep an eye out for those, but because it's a 50-50 split, there's nothing really to tell me any information here. Same with country. The vast majority of my readers are from the US. I'm from the US, publishing from the US on the WattPad US site. I don't actually know too much about how WattPad advertises itself or its usage in other countries. Something to look up, maybe to talk about for the next video. But because I don't know that information, it could be that there's just no reach out in other countries for WattPad. And so that's why the readership is mostly in the United States. It is interesting to see that there's a little bit in India and the United Kingdom. I have a thought on that, in that I did submit my story in WattPad for their branding platforms and for their WattPad original stories. So I submitted my story to WattPad Corporate to be looked at and considered for branding opportunities and things like that. And so because it's such a small percentage, I'm wondering if that went to maybe some outbound work centers to be looked at for whatever they look for in those stories or not. Or maybe it's a crawl, looking at different ways that these are bots maybe out there somewhere. I don't know. It's an anomaly. So we'll keep an eye open and we'll see what that tells us. And I kind of skipped over this top part here, but let's talk about it now. So I have 8 followers, and it tells me that I have 5 engaged readers. So that tells me quite a lot. The numbers are still really small, so they're not necessarily statistically relevant yet or statistically significant yet, but 5 out of 8 is a pretty good percentage of readers. And as that number increases, I expect that statistic to go down. I expect the engagement of the full number to go down, because that's just how that works, right? When we get to email, I'll talk a little bit about what is a good engagement number, a good open rate and click-through rate, and they're going to be a lot smaller than what you expect, but they are quite small in terms of when you go from one point to the next, that number shrinks drastically. So I'm pretty happy with the 5 engaged readers. I've got 140 total reads, 17 votes, and 12 story parts out right now, or 9 posted and 3 scheduled right now of the, 86 chapters or something like that I plan to publish. So, this tells me that it's doing really well, because remember, we're still less than 30 days from when I first started all of this. And so in less than 30 days, I've got some good engagement, I've got good feedback, I've got people voting for my story. And if you look on WattPad at a lot of stories that are out there, you might see like crickets. There's just 0 reads, 0 votes, and they might have, several story parts published, more than 12 for sure. And I think a big part of that is the engagement piece. Because as we go through, every time I post a story and in between those posts, I'm trying to, keyword trying, because it's been busy, so it's dropped off a little bit this last week. I'm trying to engage with other stories that are similar to mine. Okay, so I'm looking at stories that fall into these different rankings. My most impressive ranking right now is technology. Out of 24.9 thousand stories, I'm number 271. That's pretty significant. So if I go through and I click all of these different sections, I can see the stories that are ranking highest in them. And so then I can go in to two thoughts here. I can go in and I can start commenting on this story. It's got 95.7 thousand reads right now. There's probably hundreds of comments, people going in and out all the time, maybe. Let's take a look. Yeah, so you can see the comments at the bottom just go on and on. The comments on the side are very significant. So the reason I bring that up is because if you're engaging on a story that has just dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of comments and feedback, if your goal, which is an important part of this thought process, if your goal is to engage with the author, you might not get that engagement because they've got so much to do at this point. If your goal is to engage with the other readers in the comments, that might be worthwhile, but I think with this many, it's going to fall flat because people are just commenting so often that it's just going to shift up and nobody's really going to have time to go back and read your comment. But if we look a little further down, okay, a lot further down, I would say, here we go. We start to get to the, like, this one has 1.3 thousand. Let's read that. It's also interesting to see what everyone is doing. This one starts with an alert notice. So it's really cool how people change up the genre as they post and what they do to welcome new readers and things. So that is really interesting. If we go to, so this is not really, let's go to the chapter 1. Okay, so you can see a comment, no real feedback on the side here, a couple of comments for the feedback, but here we go. So we've got engagement down here. This is one that I would maybe try to engage with and take a look at the different followers as well, and take note if you are seeing them in other books and other stories, and try to comment to them too. Respond to their comments, start a conversation with them. Don't invite them to read your story right away. Don't try to plug your story in someone else's comments. That's tacky and annoying, and it's not going to get you what you want. It's just going to get people annoyed and not wanting to read your story. So just engage with them, and if they're interested, they'll click on your profile and they'll actually go and look at your story in and of itself without you having to do anything like that. So if you have any questions specifically about Wattpad, drop them in the comments below. Let's move on to Patreon. Right now, what I just want to look at is, are we getting people over from Wattpad to Patreon? And how is that working? How well are we doing at that? And right now, for the past 30 days, I've had 28 total visits and 23 public visits. That means that probably my one patron has been visiting 5 times in the last 30 days, and then I've got 23 random visits, people who aren't necessarily patrons. I want to know where they're coming from, and I want to know when they're coming, right? So first, let's look at the overall statistics. When I first set up Patreon, I had 1 visit, probably my patron, thank you, Ian. And then as time went on, every time I published, you'll see there's breaks here and then an increase. Every time I published, I did get some more visits to Patreon, but it really hiked up here on the 18th. So if we look back at all the statistics, January 18th, we had the most comments on January 18th that moved people over to Patreon. And this is correlation, right? Maybe not causation, but it's all we've got to go on right now. So correlation is the comments that went on January 18th with the post that I published then, or the chapter I published then, made people move over to Patreon. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back again and look at those comments and see what about that conversation or that story part encouraged people to move over, right? That's very important. Okay, now let's look at sources and see if our correlation maybe is causation, right? Sources, direct. So what that tells me is they clicked on a link directed right to my Patreon page. And right now, where I have those links are on my Instagram and in WattPad. And I haven't put out any calls to action to click it on my Instagram, so it's likely not from there because people usually act when you call them to act, which is why it's called a call to action. So likely these are from my WattPad. And when I ask people, hey, if you want all the extras, come on over to Patreon. And so it looks like whatever was going on January 18th encouraged people to come over en masse and click on that link. That's really cool. On this, we can also see people who are in Patreon just surfing, looking through it. I know it's not a statistic. It doesn't happen very easily to get traffic from Patreon itself, people just like surfing and finding you there. Usually people will follow a certain person somewhere else and then come to Patreon for that person specifically. So my tactic is not to use Patreon to drum up support on Patreon. It's to use other platforms to then move people over to Patreon as I'm able to. And so right now that seems to be working pretty well. Okay, so this is what we're looking at for Patreon. There's not a lot right now, but that's because it's very new. And I'm asking people to pay. So as we move again from channel to channel, WattPad, everything is free. And in 30 days, I've gotten a pretty good engagement. And of that smallish number, people who moved over to Patreon to look was a lot smaller, right? What were the statistics here? Of the 140 total reads, right? We've got a significantly smaller amount of people who over the last 30 days have visited the Patreon. And of those 28 visits, I've gotten one subscriber, right? So thinking about it like that, this is exactly how a funnel works. If you're using email for that funnel to direct people to purchase something, if you're using social media to ask people to join your email list, to ask people to purchase from your email list, that is called a funnel. Moving people who have no idea who you are, seeing you for the first time, warming them up with something free, moving them on to something better that might cost a little bit of money, moving them on to being a loyal person who pays again and again and again, right? A loyal follower. That's a funnel. And so as we move down the funnel, those numbers get significantly smaller. And in email, it is not uncommon to see those numbers go from 100 to 10 to 1, or 1,000 to 10 to 1, right? That is actually a pretty okay number here. If we look at people who I've moved over from Patreon, which again, I've only got one patron, so I only added one email address. The rest of these kind of came before, where I was just holding my website and the email and not really doing much with it. So I've got a handful of subscribers, but of those handful of subscribers, I've gotten 57.14% of them to open the emails I send, which in this case is this one email, and 28.57% to actually click through. So that's a pretty significant number. I would expect that number to be 30 at the highest, and I do expect it to go down again. As I start to increase subscribers and get a statistically significant amount of people, these numbers are all going to go down. And so I will soon expect to see it kind of level out, and if I'm doing a pretty good job of engaging my subscribers, that number is going to hover around 50%, that's going to hover around 30%. If it's lower than 30%, I know that I have things I need to work on. If it's higher than 30%, it's probably an anomaly, or there was something crazy going on, like a flash sale or something that really spiked everybody's attention and interest. So I'm not going to go through my email workflow in this video because it is going on a really long time. But if that is something that you're interested in, let me know and I can make that another video. Again, like I've got experience in marketing. I was copywriter for 7 years and a branding expert with small jewelry businesses and small hand makers. And so that is my background and how I work all of these things. And so it's helped me actually a lot because like handmade products and things, it's very artisan, right? Which I find very interestingly similar to author and writing because it's super subjective. It appeals to a very specific demographic, a specific readership, genreship, everything like that. And so if you make something that's super duper unique, you've niched down really far to people who are going to be incredibly interested in that one thing. You might not get 1 million people buying, but you'll get 1,000 people who are super interested in everything you make buying every time. And so that's really the goal here, is to get 1,000, ravenous fans buying from you again and again and again. And luckily, as an author, that number kind of goes up a little bit because as you get more readers, word of mouth increases to get a wider readership if you're doing, a good job. So that's my experience and that's the goal. This is the funnel that I'm using to move people through from my story to my email, where I continue to give them updates on things that are going on. Again, if you have any thoughts on this process, if you're actually going through this process, which I saw one of my YouTube comments are about someone who is doing this exact same thing. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say and what your experience is. If you have experience with any of these platforms and any tips or tricks that I am missing out on, I would greatly appreciate any and all advice. In the next video I'm going to give you a little bit more insight into different aspects. We might go over social media, we might go over the email funnel, but let me know what you're interested in hearing about for this whole process, and I can put together a video on that. So I have to get off of this now because I need to go live on Patreon, which is one of the benefits you get as a patron, for a Q&A. So if you're interested in reading the story that I have on WattPad, make sure you go to WattPad and check it out. The link's in the description below. And if you're interested in becoming a patron and getting all the extras, including a Q&A and character sheets, world building sheets, all these different things that might interest you as both a reader and a writer, let me know. Go over to Patreon and buy me a cup of coffee. It's just a $3 subscription, and actually that's less than Starbucks. So if you're interested, I would greatly appreciate it. It's supporting me and it's helping me get enough money to continue my journey as a published author and making my dream come true. Thank you so much, and I will record another video very soon.